Joe Biden, the definitive account of his life and political career. Joe Biden was the only candidate to remain in the race throughout the Democratic Party presidential primary election process, which began in February 2019 with 28 presidential candidates. Despite the postponement of the primaries and the nominating convention, where Biden's Democratic presidential candidacy will be formalized, Joe Biden is the Democratic presidential candidate who will compete with Donald Trump in the November 2020 presidential elections. In April 2019, former Vice President Biden announced his candidacy in a video that forcefully condemned Trump's support for white supremacists and emphasized his mission to save America's soul. Biden, 78, graduated from the University of Delaware and Syracuse University, respectively. He was elected Senator of Delaware in 1972 at the age of 30, becoming one of the youngest senators in U.S. history. Biden won the senatorial election 7 times in 28 years, with nearly 60% of the vote each time. He became the vice presidential candidate of Democratic presidential candidate Obama in 2008 and was elected vice president in 2008 and 2012. Biden is a devout Catholic and the first Catholic vice president of the United States. He has faced criticism from the church for his views on abortion and same-sex marriage, but he stands firm in his beliefs. Biden, who lost his first wife and 1-year-old daughter in a car accident the year he was elected senator, took exemplary care of his 2 sons, who survived the accident but were seriously injured. He made time for his family by taking the Amtrak train from the Capitol to his home in Wilmington every week. In 2015, Biden lost his 46-year-old son, Beau Biden, who was diagnosed with brain cancer. The American people have long appreciated Biden's unwavering commitment to their interests, despite the personal challenges he has faced. Biden has spent 48 years in the political arena. This is why he is a well-known figure with extensive foreign policy experience, particularly given his 8-year tenure as vice president. However, this 48 years of political experience is also a heavy burden to bear. Biden, who had run for president twice before, ended his 1988 campaign due to plagiarism in his speeches, and his 2008 campaign due to his gaffe about Obama's being black, and his many racial blunders and lack of support. Biden's treatment of Anita Hill was undoubtedly one of his most unforgettable political mistakes in 48 years. In 1991, Clarence Thomas, the Republican nominee for U.S. Supreme Court Justice, was accused of sexual harassment by Anita Hill, who used to work in his office. Anita Hill testified in the Senate during Thomas's confirmation process to voice her allegations and prevent him from being confirmed as a judge. Biden treated Hill abysmally throughout her testimony and actively prevented her from exercising her right to present witnesses. Despite Biden calling Hill to apologize before announcing his presidential candidacy in 2019, she stated that his apology was insufficient. Biden was also responsible for initiating Trump's impeachment process. After pressuring the Ukrainian president to investigate corruption allegations against Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, a board member of a Ukrainian state-owned natural gas company, and abusing his presidential powers for the 2020 elections, Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives and impeachment proceedings began. Biden used the incident to show how scared Trump was of him. However, he became the target of criticism for nepotism and was forced to admit that it was a mistake to have his son in such a position. Biden has been trying to speak without stuttering for years. However, in recent years, especially with the effect of old age, he has started to stutter frequently in his speeches. Biden was subjected to harsh and unethical criticism from Republicans, who attacked him for stuttering. He responded by announcing that he stuttered, and after this statement, those who attacked him for this feature apologized one by one. Biden is a Democrat who is close to the center wing and generally advocates moderate left-wing policies. He is a politician who has the support of blue-collar voters because he comes from a middle-class family and speaks in simple, clear, straightforward language that resonates with people. He is clearly aiming to be in the middle of the left and center wings of the party. He won the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination primary. Shortly after announcing his candidacy, Joe Biden was subjected to ridicule, especially on social media. His frequent forgetfulness at events and rallies, his inability to finish his sentences, and the belief that he was not ready for the U.S. presidency reinforced the idea that he was not suited to the role, especially among the left and young voters. Biden's controversial past and his past gaffe-like remarks are back in the spotlight, particularly with the announcement and intense campaigning of young centrist candidates such as Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker. In the summer of 2019, the debates were dominated by one topic: Biden's past scandals, gaffes, and controversial votes. Biden's long and controversial past has been thrust into the spotlight, and the center wing has a plethora of young and diverse presidential candidate alternatives. As a result, Biden has fallen in the polls and donations to his campaign have plummeted. In the last quarter of 2009, Sanders raised an impressive $34.5 million, Buttigieg $24.7 million, while Biden trailed behind with only $22.7 million. Sanders and Buttigieg received heavy individual donations. Warren received a lot of individual donations and used money left over from her Senate campaign in 2018. And Bloomberg used his personal fortune as a source of funds. Biden, however, was unable to open campaign offices, hold rallies, or advertise in most states of the country. The first primary took place in Iowa on 3rd of February 2020. Pete Buttigieg won 26.17% of the state's delegates, despite receiving the fewest votes. Joe Biden finished fourth with just 13.7% of the vote, behind Buttigieg, Sanders, and Warren. He only managed to win 6 delegates. The second primary took place in New Hampshire on 11th February 2022. Bernie Sanders won by a narrow margin, with Buttigieg coming second, Klobuchar third, and Warren fourth. Joe Biden suffered a crushing defeat. Biden finished fifth in this election with only 8.4% of the vote and failed to win any delegates because he fell below the 15% threshold. The media, especially after the Iowa and New Hampshire elections, was full of talk of the Biden campaign having failed and needing to end. Biden's donations, which had been on a steady decline, saw a further drop. Some of Biden's supporters withdrew their support and turned to other centrist candidates, such as Bloomberg and Buttigieg, who were seen as likely to win. The Biden campaign responded to criticism of these heavy electoral defeats by stating that Iowa and New Hampshire were states with 90% white populations and low percentages of Hispanic and Black voters. These states were not representative of the overall demographic makeup of the U.S. The campaign also stated that Biden would win the primary because of his heavy Black voter support in ethnically diverse states. Sanders won the third primary election in Nevada on 22nd February 2020 with 40.5% of the vote, thanks to the support of Hispanic voters. Biden came second with 18.9% of the vote, with the support of Black voters, leaving behind candidates such as Buttigieg, Warren, and Klobuchar, who had received higher votes than him in previous races. Biden's second place in the Nevada primary and his large share of the Black vote in the state increased his chances of being elected, as did the support of voters and donors. Biden made it clear that his goal is the South Carolina primary on 29th of February 2020. Biden is certain of a great victory in the South Carolina primary, which he won with 60% of the Democratic vote. He will return to the field after the heavy defeats he suffered. His entire strategy is based on winning the South Carolina elections. Biden excelled in the debate before the South Carolina elections and made no mistakes. He received the open support of Jim Clyburn, the most influential figure in South Carolina and the highest-ranking Black politician in the Democratic Party. A significant number of voters who voted in the South Carolina primary went to the polls and supported Biden after this endorsement. Jim Clyburn is a well-connected figure in South Carolina. Having represented the state for 27 years, he is also well-liked and respected by Black voters. Biden won a landslide victory with 48.7% of the vote, thanks to this critical support and the consolidation of the Black vote in his favor. Sanders came second with 19.8% of the vote. Candidates like Warren, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar were resoundingly defeated, receiving less than 10% of the vote. Biden's victory in South Carolina, where he won by a large margin, proved that black voters are intensely and unequivocally behind him. Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, the centrist presidential candidates, knew they couldn't win without the support of black voters. They were one of the most important Democratic Party voter groups. They got advice from strong opinion leaders and experienced politicians like former President Barack Obama and Harry Reid. They're from the center wing of the party. They withdrew their candidacy and supported Joe Biden right after the South Carolina elections and just before the Super Tuesday elections. On the night before Super Tuesday, the most important election of the primary process, former presidential candidates Klobuchar and Buttigieg and former presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, a very popular figure in Texas, held a joint rally with Joe Biden in Dallas, Texas. They announced their support for Biden and criticized his main rival Sanders for advocating unrealistic policies and being a politician who cannot defeat Trump in the general election. The center wing of the party demonstrated its unity. In the debates held before the Super Tuesday elections, Elizabeth Warren was unequivocal in her criticism of Mike Bloomberg and his controversial past, especially on black and women's rights. This reduced the likelihood of Bloomberg being a strong and alternative center candidate. Over time, the black and center electoral votes that were directed towards Bloomberg turned towards Biden with the victories he won and the support he received. Biden won the Super Tuesday elections held on 3rd March 2020, taking 10 of the 14 states. After Super Tuesday, Bloomberg and Warren withdrew from the race. Bloomberg, a centrist candidate, threw his support behind Biden, while Warren, a left-wing candidate, did not declare her support for Sanders, a left-wing candidate with a very similar platform. Warren preferred to remain neutral. Biden went on to win 8 of the 9 state primaries held throughout March with large vote margins. Biden gained the support of blue-collar white voters in states such as Michigan, Washington, and Maine, where Sanders won in the 2016 primaries, and caused unexpected defeats for the Sanders campaign. Tulsi Gabbard, the presidential candidate, withdrew from the race on 19th of March 2020 and threw her support behind Biden. Bernie Sanders, who had no chance of winning enough delegates, announced his withdrawal on 8th April 2020. This left Joe Biden as the only candidate left in the race and the presumptive Democratic presidential candidate. The coalition of voters is solidly behind Biden. Middle-aged black voters, in particular, are firmly behind Biden, with support reaching 50–60% and a high level of engagement at the polls. While young black voters back Sanders, their voter turnout rates lag behind those of middle-aged black voters. Consequently, Biden secures resounding victories in the primaries in states with large black populations. Biden is the clear choice for black voters because he is the vice president and close friend of Obama, the first black president. He has a heart connection and communication with black voters for years, and he receives active support from influential black politicians. Biden received overwhelming support, particularly from religious black voters in the southern states. Middle-aged religious black voters are also reluctant to back Sanders, who defines himself as a democratic socialist because they perceive him as too radical to defeat Trump. Defeating Trump in the 2020 elections and returning to Obama-era policies is the top priority for most middle-aged black voters, and they see radical and systemic changes as less important. Voters whose priority is to defeat Trump. The party's centrist wing and centrist media members and opinion leaders, especially after the South Carolina victory, were adamant that Biden was the only candidate who could defeat Trump. They also made it clear that Sanders was too radical a candidate to defeat Trump and not even a real Democrat. This perception was reinforced, especially among Democratic voters whose only priority was to defeat Trump. Voter groups with this priority voted in favor of Biden. The Biden campaign knew it had to convince this voter group, so it made defeating Trump the focus of its advertisements and content. Blue-collar white voters, a significant portion of blue-collar white voters who disliked Hillary Clinton and voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016, will undoubtedly support Joe Biden. Sanders is losing elections in important states such as Michigan, where he won in 2016. Even if he wins, he is suffering a decline in his share of the vote. Joe Biden has been presenting himself for years as a candidate from the people, from a poor background, sincere and sympathetic. This is why a significant portion of white blue-collar voters support him. Middle-class suburban voters who voted for Trump in 2016, but then voted for moderate Democratic candidates who advocated centrist policies in the 2018 midterm elections and helped the Democrats regain the majority in the House of Representatives, and middle-class suburban women who were uncomfortable with Trump's policies participated heavily in the 2020 primaries and voted for Biden. Most researchers are clear that voter turnout rates increased not in areas where Sanders won, but in areas where Biden and other centrist candidates, such as Buttigieg and Klobuchar, won. They are convinced that centrist candidates brought new voters to the party. One reason for this is the low voter turnout rate among young people who strongly support Sanders. Policies opposed: a Medicare for all policy, where private health insurance is not available. Free college for all, complete cancellation of student debt. Main policies advocated raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Free college education for children of families earning less than $125,000 a year. Biden has adopted this plan proposed by Sanders years ago and included it in his platform. We must preserve private health insurance and expand the scope of Obamacare to offer public health insurance to those who cannot afford it and those who want it. Biden states that 97% of the country will have health insurance with this plan. The left wing is particularly critical of the exclusion of 3%. He will make arrangements to protect consumers and working people in the bankruptcy regime. Biden adopted Warren's bankruptcy policy and thus sent a positive message to the left wing. Reducing carbon emissions by taxing them, increasing teacher salaries, new international trade agreements, restructuring of student debt, increasing the rates of existing taxes paid by the rich. While his policies are more centrist than those of left-wing presidential candidates such as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, most political scientists agree that Joe Biden will soon be the most left-wing Democratic presidential candidate in U.S. politics. With Bernie Sanders out of the race, Biden is moving left to win over young voters and boost Democratic turnout in the general election. While some left-wing opinion leaders welcome this effort, many others are unconvinced that it is sincere or long-term. Strong characteristics. Foreign policy experience. A simple and understandable discourse backed by leading party figures and experienced politicians. In 2008 and 2012, he voted for Obama-Biden. In 2016, he voted for Trump, knowing he could win over the voters who voted for Trump in the 2020 elections and defeat him. This coalition of voters includes upper-middle-class voters who are centrist, those who want to defeat Trump, blue-collar white voters, black voters, and conservative Democrats. Weak and controversial features. Lack of support from young and left-wing voters. He later changed his views, but at the time, he was actively supportive of the Iraq War, opposed to the busing of black children to white schools, and in favor of cuts in Social Security expenditure. His opponents were quick to remind him of this. He made physical contact with women in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. When many women expressed their discomfort, Biden received special training on this issue before announcing his candidacy. He released a video in which he stated that he understood the importance of personal space and apologized. Tara Reid, who worked in Joe Biden's senatorial office for 6 months between 1992 and 1993, has made the bold accusation that she was sexually harassed by Biden. She made this clear on various platforms last March. Reid's statements have not been heavily publicized due to the coronavirus pandemic and the politics of some media outlets. However, they have been intensely brought up, especially on social media. Reid stated that women's rights organizations such as Time's Up did not support her in matters such as lawyer support on the grounds that her accuser was a political candidate for a federal office and that the process would not be politically neutral. She also explained that she was left alone in this process. Republicans will undoubtedly use this sexual harassment allegation during the election process to diminish the impact of the allegations against Trump in the eyes of the public. He has a history of making jokes and gaffes that can be easily misunderstood, especially when discussing sensitive topics like race and gender. In recent years, he has often been caught off guard, forgetting what he was going to say, and instead telling irrelevant stories and memories. For example, during the September debate, Julian Castro, who recently withdrew as a presidential candidate, mocked Biden by saying, "Are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?" If elected, he will become the oldest U.S. president. Chances of victory against Trump. The corona pandemic has made it extremely difficult to predict the outcome of the U.S. presidential elections in November 2020. However, one thing is clear: the current situation is highly unpredictable and uncertain. The outcome of the November 2020 elections will depend almost entirely on Donald Trump's success in handling the corona pandemic, taking the necessary measures at the right time, and getting the economy back on track. Joe Biden must unite the Democratic Party electorate and gain the support of voters, civil society organizations, voter groups, especially young voters. Between the ages of 1840, who supported Sanders heavily in the primaries, and left-wing voters, regardless of how Donald Trump handles the corona pandemic crisis. Biden will undoubtedly lose the 2020 elections if voter turnout and support for these groups drops. Biden is working hard to reach these voter groups and consolidate his support within the party. Biden is certain he can win the elections in Pennsylvania, where he was born and raised, and where Trump won in 2016. He also believes he can triumph in states such as Wisconsin and Michigan, where the blue-collar white voters with whom he has strong ties are active, and where Trump won in the 2016 elections. These are states he is ambitious to win in the 2020 elections. Biden is certain he will win the 2020 elections. He plans to unite Democratic Party voters with his broad coalition and win the votes of disgruntled Trump voters with centrist policies and a moderate campaign. Biden has promised to choose a female vice president if he is selected as the presidential candidate. The likely female vice president will be one of the following names: former presidential candidates and senators: Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, former Georgia governor candidate Stacey Abrams, who is known for her work on fair elections and significantly increased voter turnout in the election she ran for, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who came to the fore with her efforts to fight the coronavirus, and Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth,